So today I'm joined by Joe Kirkland, who is the Solihull Moors Women's manager. And Joe, I welcome you to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate having me on.
Absolutely. Your career is incredibly interesting. You've been managing in different countries, including America. But could you please start us off then with your early days growing up, presumably playing football yourself?
Yeah, so sort of began playing fairly late, to be fair. So I don't think I started playing until about 11 or 12 years old, which typically, I think if you're going to have a journey in football, then that's typically quite late as a player. So yeah, literally played for my local grassroots team. Probably wasn't ever one of the better players in the team, but I always felt as though maybe because of that reason, I had to understand the game in a different perspective. So in terms of being able to read the game maybe quicker, I always felt as though I always worked hard. So, ultimately developing them aspects to try and gain a bit of an extra advantage on my teammates and the players that I was playing against, because I wasn't ever technically the best player in the world. And to be fair, I maybe stopped playing around 16, 17, played for a couple of Sunday league sides, sort of amongst coaching. But I feel as though since then it's been incredibly difficult to put some time aside to continue playing. So yeah, I suppose that's a short intro on my playing journey.
Well, including myself, and I spoke to a player actually this morning who was speaking about starting late, and he's now professional in Hong Kong. And it's mad to know that, I suppose, you are just talently gifted if you do start off later in the game sometimes. But for you, I suppose you decided to go down the coaching route. So did you prefer coaching overall?
Yeah, I thought about this question quite a lot, to be fair, because a lot of questions that we get asked is why do you become a coach? Because it can be certainly stressful at times, and there's a lot of difficulties within, coaching and management. But I always loved the game. My dad took me to watch England versus Mexico when I was, I think, 8 or 9 years old at Wembley, and I could just remember walking out and seeing the fans' first ever football match that I've ever been to, and sort of since then, really, I'm a Tottenham fan, and I've got a massive obsession with the game, and I think you need that if you're going to be a successful coach, because it can be certainly be very hard at times. And I suppose there's certainly aspects of when I was a player where I felt as though sometimes if you're low on confidence or you're struggling with different aspects such as that I had a coach that I felt as though managed to get the best out of me through that, doing a few, putting in place a few simple strategies, and I felt as though that I could have an influence on doing the same with those players in terms of enabling them to be confident and for them to perform at the best. I've got a bit of an interest in psychology, so sort of that like leadership element, psychological aspect. I certainly really enjoy. But yeah, I love being on the grass. That's my main element. To be fair, my assistant manager normally gives me a little bit of grief because I'm not the best on match days. I feel as though probably one of my weaknesses that I like to have control on things. But certainly training, coaching, developing players, throughout the week is certainly my favourite aspect of football coaching in general.
So when you were growing up then watching Tottenham, they haven't had too much success, but in recent times they definitely have. And tonight is obviously a big night for you guys. So what is it like then to be a Tottenham fan, balancing in the management? Do you ever look into the management through the eyes of Frank or Postecoglou and take elements of their game?
I think that, to be fair, that's a really good question. And certainly from, Postecoglou last season, a massive thing for me was that pure confidence and self-belief in everything that he was doing. And I felt that throughout occasions of my journey over the last couple of years where you might doubt yourself, even though, we can see with Ange that there was probably us doing things which were maybe wrong or incorrect. But because he had that ultimate belief and with those principles, that still came across. And I'm pretty certain that that's why Spurs won the Europa League, was because of the confidence that Ange installed within the team. And ultimately, no other managers have been able to achieve that. But yeah, then certainly from a tactical perspective as well, I feel as though you're always influenced by different coaches and managers. So, obviously Thomas Frank is a lot more pragmatic than Ange, but I've certainly picked up elements of that and the pressing in terms of your principles and how you want to set out to play, I think.
So before we talk about the individual clubs and university for you as well, have you always remained the same in your tactical beliefs? So if you were to go to a different club, would you always sort of try and instill the same tactic?
Yeah, I've switched. Typically, I've sort of always played a 3-5-2 or a 4-2-3-1. I went into my previous role at Burton Albion, and we set out to play sort of an aggressive 4-2-3-1, being on the front foot, attacking fullbacks. And I think towards the end of pre-season, both fullbacks ended up getting injured. So typical. And then so that sort of we went into 3-5-2 and ultimately, being a bit more counter-attacking and looking to break opponents down that way. with the situation at Solihull Moors, we came into a very difficult situation where, to be fair, we had no depth at all. We hardly had any players. The team and club had gone for a difficult time in terms of the women's team. A lot of players had left, and there wasn't much of an opportunity for us to bring any players in when we first came in. So it was sort of adjusting to what we had. So 5-4-1, low block, again, counter-attacking, looking to hit teams on the break that way. I feel as though it's important to be pragmatic. I suppose going back to my time at Burton Albion with the women's team, is that the actual pitch that we played on was slightly smaller. And a lot of the players that we had were slightly more direct. So our thinking behind the 3-5-2 was actually, can we be a bit more defensive and close down spaces and central areas on the pitch? And because a lot of the players naturally went long anyway, there probably wasn't enough time to install certain methods where we could play, fancy football. It was alluding to the players' natural abilities of going long, and actually we'd rather have two strikers up front to look to receive the ball and then look to play forward. So yeah, definitely pragmatic. And Thomas Frank, I was listening to one of his interviews earlier, the best coaches are pragmatic and adapt to us. And that's certainly a big point for me, yeah.
There's obviously a load of managers that have their different styles, but for me, I just could never get over the fact that some managers want to play 90 minutes of defensive football. And I think for you, obviously you're in charge of that. You're in charge of how your team plays. And can you agree with me? Is it just the worst thing to go, let's just hold back, let's go for the 0-0 or go for the 1-0 win if we're lucky?
Yeah, I think, you probably don't, you never really want to play football that way, but sometimes football sort of it makes you want to play that way, which is the biggest thing if you want to get results. We felt as though if we went out and pressed, we probably didn't have the best players last season in terms of pressing and squad depth, which allows us to do that. So certainly reserving our energy in a bit of a low block, defensive block. And I suppose from a fan perspective is that people never normally have a full understanding of what's actually going on within the team and players with injuries and can they cope with certain conditions of how you want to play. Wouldn't want to choose to play that way, but if you want to get results and grinding out those wins, sometimes they can also feel better as well. I remember last season we played on the pitch against Notts County, who were a well-established National League women's side. We drew 2-2, very defensive performance, but we felt as though that we were effective on the counter-attack, and we trained throughout the week, and we felt as though those principles that we got across in training happened on that match day. And we had 300-400 fans there, I think. So it was really good on that occasion to see what we've worked on ultimately happening on the pitch.
Well, I suppose when it all goes perfectly and all your tactics are just done to a T, then it must be the best feeling. But the upcoming 3 years that I've been studying when I've been looking at you is from 2020 up to about 2022. There was quite a lot that was going on, like university. You were over in America and back here. But I believe America sort of came first when you established club football over in California. So could you tell us what that is?
Yeah, coaching abroad certainly has been one of my passions, and probably between that period of 2020 to 2023, that's probably look back on as probably the 3 most enjoyable years of my life. And certainly coaching abroad is something that I want to continue moving forwards, whether that be in 5 years' time or sort of the short term. Grows you as a person, develops you massively. I think probably never had that much confidence when I was maybe in my teens. But certainly going to a first he went to Spain in 2019, I think, and was back out there in 2020 just doing sort of sport camps with kids, and that turned into a little bit of sort of football coaching as well. Been to Portugal. I'm a college teacher, so we took a group of students to Portugal and Marseille in France. But I always seem to, every time I go abroad, I end up football coaching, even though if that isn't directly the purpose, or I end up doing something related to football. So yeah, America was massive. I set up my own sort of business throughout COVID, doing football coaching sessions in small groups, and a bit of a variety of things, to be fair, because we did a little bit of coach education as well around sort of that psychological, mental aspect. Went to Spain in 2023 was it, or 22? I think it was 3 years ago. So yeah, spent 3 or 4 months out there in California, which was unbelievable. The best experience that I've had, certainly as a coach, and maybe it's a life experience as well. Managed to bring club football out into America, so sort of delivered sessions out there to a lot of players and a few coaches as well, which probably was the most rewarding thing for me. I worked with an under 14s girls team for 2 weeks, helping them to develop their principles and just showing them typical sessions that we do over here in England. And they were so appreciative of just seeing a different coach from England coach, and really enjoyed that aspect. And I suppose from a financial perspective as well, that I don't think, if you're looking to go into coaching to make a load of money from the game, you're probably in it for the wrong reasons, and you're probably never really going to make, certainly short term, loads of money. But the money compared to England is incredible in terms of coaching sessions. So to give you a figure, there were sort of players paying $200 an hour for a small group session. Where what's that, about £180? Something like that. Whereas in England, it's more sort of £20 a session. So it's a massive difference. So yeah, certainly a very eye-opening experience for me, but certainly one which I thoroughly enjoyed, and would love to do again.
So were you out there like 24/7? So you were living there with that coaching on the side?
Yeah, so I was working for another organisation as well, so staying with host families, and that's ultimately is an experience within itself. I stayed with some fantastic families, so I spent some time out in Arizona as well, which is pretty much desert, so very different to where I live in Derbyshire in England. Again, the biggest thing from America was that confidence. I feel as though that if you can jump on a plane and travel halfway across the world, look after yourself, do a good job and come back, then you can pretty much about achieve anything, really. I don't think there's many harder things in terms of life in general if you're able to do that. So certainly from my perspective, coming back, having that full belief in yourself and that confidence was really massively important.
So before you came back here and got your first introduction into the sport here, you were at university, right? So what were you studying there, and how did that go for you?
Yeah, so football coaching development. So that was through Staffordshire University. I did that from a local college I was there when I was sort of 16, 17. So it was really beneficial for me to maybe understand the different side of the game. And I suppose I think that's where my love for psychology comes from as well. One of the modules and one of the tutors who delivered that delivered it really well, and certainly thinking about aspects such as like growth mindset and thinking about how athletes deal with stress and which ultimately then enables them to perform, for me was really interesting, because as much as I'm not a qualified psychologist, I would love to hopefully I do help players feel confident, also enables me to create an environment where players can perform at a high level.
Burton Albion Women gave you a phenomenal opportunity. It was like this for 3 years. So could you talk to us about the under-18s? And that was your first proper insight into your full managerial reign.
Yeah, so managed to go from grassroots coaching all of a sudden in England, in amongst of coaching abroad, to get myself an opportunity at Burton Albion. So was lucky enough to coach with the men's side and with the women's first team and with the youth junior side. So pretty much got an understanding of most teams across the Burton Albion Football Club. To be fair, it was my club, really. I had a season ticket there since I was 14, 15 years old. So I've been sort of going to games for 10 years, and it was a great opportunity for me to be involved in a club which has maybe old-fashioned core values, where a lot of maybe the things that the club use maybe aren't modern as such. I think that's changed now since new owners have come in, but the core values of the football club certainly enabled me to learn and develop. There's some very good people. I was around a lot of ex-professional players as well at that time. So certainly understanding them from a professional playing perspective compared to mine, which this isn't professional players' perspective, put me in good stead. In terms of as the Burton Albion women's side, we came into a difficult situation where our job was to try and change the environment for it to be more of a winning culture rather than maybe a team social in a way. We wanted to try and set high standards slightly more, and the aim was to win the league, really, for us to take the role, and we did. And we managed to take the team from 8th to 4th, which was massively positive. Didn't achieve the goal that we really wanted to, but we felt as though that we got the best out of the players, and certainly put us in a good place coming towards the end of the season.
When you first got that role in 2021 to be the under-18s manager, what was your first instinct? Were you started to watch YouTube videos on how other managers were? What was your first immediate thoughts?
That's a good question. I was coaching sort of grassroots at the time. I suppose probably the highest age group that I was coaching was maybe an under-13s team. And I can remember taking the under-18s girls on a match day, and I was thinking it was probably going to be pretty straightforward, but I can always remember putting on a warm-up and they were sort of halfway through the warm up, maybe standing and looking at me, thinking, "What is this that this guy's getting me to do?" And from that moment on, it sort of made sure that everything that I do, the fine details, and I suppose certainly working within the women's games, that the difference is that I feel as though that they probably want to understand the reasons to why you're doing things a little bit more. Spoke to a lot of people and said, that some people say the difference between the men's and the women's game is hardly any difference. I think it's massively different. So they want to know the why a little bit more. And I suppose that, from a social aspect as well, it's important to put social things more so in the women's teams that I've been in, just because sometimes maybe players don't interact with each other as much, in terms of maybe being slightly cliquey and groups staying with each other and not wanting to involve themselves with others. So that's an important aspect as well. So yeah, it certainly was a challenging time for me. Maybe, how old was I? Would have been then 21, 22, taking the under-18s side. So certainly I've learned a lot from coaching in all the different countries, age groups, and genders as well.
And then the development team came up the following year. How did you get asked to do that? Because it's just 1 year and then another year and a different team.
Yeah, the development team was a new team put in place for that specific year. So got to the end of the under-18s, and I was looking maybe to progress myself as well, maybe to go and do a little bit with the first team. But the development team was an effective gap, I think, to bridge myself and my development, and got a great opportunity to be around the first team players and the first team to learn and develop. Whilst also, I suppose that the biggest thing for that was very rewarding players, opportunities to train with the first team, and because it was a new team, setting a new culture as well, and looking to build on maybe the under-18s players. I knew a lot of the players stepping up, so it was good to really continue that development, really.
How often were you speaking to your boss? So how often were you speaking to the guys above you to give them feedback on training or the results, or what was the communication like throughout the whole club?
Yeah, I think communication from my experiences has been, the most important thing for any coach to succeed, I think, and that's communication from yourself and the players and people above you as well. And certainly what I got from Burton Albion was that there was maybe some things that I wanted to implement, but which maybe the club weren't ready to implement. So there were certain periods of the role where I felt as though maybe I wasn't the best fit for the role at times, because I was maybe demanding too much from the players. So that's certainly, when I went into Solihull Moors, I made sure that the club understood exactly what I wanted and how they could help me to support that. I suppose you never really truly understand what the club is going to be like until you actually firstly go in. But I try and align that, even at Solihull Moors now, there's quite a lot of new people who have came into the role. There's been a bit of change at the club. So I send weekly updates to the people above me. We've got a women's coordinator now who's come in, who's sort of effectively the head of women's football at the football club. So I've never had a head of women's football at the club before. So it's been great to me to utilise that. And I suppose within both women's teams as well, we've always took a big ownership on things outside of the team as well. So even little things like social media, making the players feel valued, sponsorships. And that's maybe one of my weak points, where I've maybe been sucked into that a little bit too much over the last couple of years, where my main enjoyment is on that sort of coaching aspect. But certainly within Solihull Moors at the minute, we feel really positive. We've got a great structure. Hopefully, going into an exciting season, fingers crossed.
Well, just going back to Burton, you still hold the highest points per game, and that was made in since 2017. So that must be quite something to keep that record still.
Yeah, it's again, we feel as though we did well. We managed to take the team from 8th to 4th, and unfortunately, I think the team finished 8th or maybe even lower last season. So it shows that we were doing something right, and I don't think I think a lot of them players are still there, but I think hopefully what we're able to do is going back to the style of play. We played a very simple style of play, which enabled us to get those results, and trying to develop an environment where players felt confident, and it was a positive one.
I suppose when you're constantly piling instructions onto your players, so like the wing back does this or the centre back does that, it can overload the player. So I think to maybe keep it simple at times is possibly the right option.
Yeah, my assistant manager comes from an education background, so he's a director of like an education organisation. I'm still teaching as well, so from that learning aspect, I'm always conscious of. We was doing an analysis meeting a few weeks ago, and we had a slide on the board which ultimately shown our values, and the biggest one was all in. So it was sort of all in capital red letters. But amongst that, we had probably another 15 words associated to how we want to play and what our values are. So, for example, energy, press, kickoff. So, for example, we have small wins from kickoffs and how we look to regain the balls immediately from kicking off. But first thing that my assistant manager said to me was, you're overloading the players way too much. And sometimes with the style of play, I'm conscious of having, I've got a PowerPoint, which is probably 30 slides, which goes into detail around how we want to play. But actually in front of the players, it's sort of, can we establish key principles? So for the first half of this pre-season, we've basically focused just on the press. We've got maybe 4 weeks until the season starts. We've not really touched much on actually in possession at all, because we want to nail pressing and our out of possession shape and structure. So it's trying to, as much as sometimes I do overload the players, it's trying to really have clarity on what we're trying to achieve.
And before we go to Solihull Moors, because obviously that is where you currently are, just a couple more things on what happened in these years in between, because obviously you are still a sports lecturer, you did go back to America, but I suppose when you are in pre-season, how do you organise all these friendlies, and who do you eye up a team like Derby County that you played and go, this is good for this reason, and then this club's good for this reason and this reason?
That's a really good question, because I spoke to a few managers, and from what I got was that a lot of managers, let the club sort of deal with a lot of the friendlies a lot of the time. And we had time. We finished the season early, so I think we finished the season. I think it was the third week in April. So we had quite a long time before the pre-season really started, 2 months. So yeah, we got maybe a few of the stronger teams to begin with, because we felt as though in terms of out of possession, could we hold a good shape against some really good teams and actually press some really good teams as well, which is what we struggled with last season because we didn't have that capacity to do it. And then towards the end of pre-season, the idea was to get a few sort of, I'm not going to say weaker because that's the wrong word, but maybe teams who would be able to dominate the ball a little bit more, where they potentially come and set a bit of a low block up and we'd have to break them down. Walsall, for example, on Sunday was a great one. So we've just started the in possession at work, and we Walsall were a team in the division below. We beat them 2-1. I felt as though we were a better team both halves. However, in the first half, we took a really lack of care on the ball. So, for that first instalment, now we're thinking about in possession. That was a great challenge for us, and we've got a couple of lower sides from lower divisions over the next 2 games, and then finish off with a strong one against Wrexham, final week of this month. So it will be a tough game, but hopefully a game where we can combine the 2 aspects really, with both that in possession and out of possession.
I spoke to Ryan McCarthy, who's over in Gibraltar, and he's part of the team called the Hound Dogs, and this is a new team in Gibraltar in their professional tier. And it is just so exciting from even my perspective to hear him sign new players, play these fixtures, organise it all. And I suppose it's the same for you. You want to really put your stamp onto the players, and you want to sign the right players for the team. So how do you go about signing players?
It's tough in the women's game. It's especially because at this level, the sort of teams which pay some players and teams which don't. So you're trying to find other ways in which you can try and bring players to the club. We've got a partnership with Nivea. So Nivea, they sponsor Liverpool, and we're the only other team that they sponsor. So we've worked hard to really have a fantastic relationship with those guys who really support us, and basically to put them at the front of what we do, making sure that everything that we do is a professional environment, from training with the best footballers that we can possibly train with, make sure that every player, the ball, striking the ball's pumped up, and the feel good around the training venue is really professional. And that's certainly an aspect that we want to continue, and I think we do really well. We've got a psychologist. We've got an S&C coach from last season who's left to gone to Everton. The one that unfortunately we're losing the new one that we appointed because he's just been offered a full-time role with Cambridge. So, but we're getting great people into the coaching staff, and good people changes the whole environment really. And if you can get that professional aspect right, I think that it ultimately encourages players to come over to the club. And hopefully I want to see it from a training perspective as well, where when players come to training, we have a massive sort of emphasis on coming to develop, coming to win, wanting to be the best that we can possibly be. And we make that very clear, because actually in some players actually don't really want that, and some players might actually want a team at this level where it is maybe more of a social, and we, as much as we still want that element, we want to win and we want to be competitive and be the best as to what we can be. So just by saying those words, I think, it attracts players that way. But yeah, typically just by messaging them and identifying targets early on and putting the feelers out. We put sort of transfer requests in, if you like, for certain players last season, knowing full well that we weren't going to get them. But actually, it would plant a seed in their head for this season, and two of those have worked out well. So, I suppose that's a strategy which has put us in good stead.
And then in terms of going into this season, I want to talk about America first. So actually, let's talk about America first. So you did go back to America, to California in June of 2022, and you were there for quite a while, actually. I suppose this will be your first long-term stint there. Why did you decide to go back to America after doing the thing at Burton?
Yeah, it's again, it was just a great opportunity to go to another country, and at the minute I've got a bit of an obsession with trying to go to as many countries as I can, and even if I'm going on holiday, I'll sort of try and go to, I don't know, try and watch a football team. If I go on holiday, I'll try and go out there and watch a team play. I went to Portugal and was lucky enough to be around a few teams out there, and it just comes from that enjoyment of going to abroad and enjoying that aspect of it. And again, just challenges yourself when you're having to live abroad, meet new people. Went out there and I knew nobody, made friends for life who I still keep in contact with this day. So certainly, again, in the future, that's sort of one of my aims and aspirations is to go abroad again, potentially to another new country to sort of do the same, if you like.
But I do suppose, going into the political realm a tiny bit, that obviously with the European Union that we have left, it is harder than to go abroad, to live abroad, because now you've got to have the whole visa situation as well. So are you finding yourself in that pickle as well?
Yeah, it was harder. I tried to go out, or I was meant to sort of go out to the US this summer with a Premier League club, but we sort of signed the contract. I was meant to be going, and then sort of last minute, it was very difficult to get a visa, and it was a lot more expensive than when I first went out there. And there was a few complex things, which was basically going to cost me thousands and thousands to sort of go. In the end, I felt as though it weren't worth it, and I wanted to stick with what I was doing at the minute, just being open and honest. And we, even little things like when I went to, where did I go? I went to Greece last year, and your mobile phones, you go out there and you got to get a new SIM card. I think it's Greece or one of the countries that I've been in. It was difficult to, have to sort a new contract out or get something a lot more, expenses wise. So it is tough. And probably one thing that a lot of people don't realise that actually, if you want to look into move abroad, voting to leave the EU probably wasn't a good thing, but it depends what angle you're looking at it from.
Yeah, for sure. But I suppose when you are going to these countries, it is quite something. But if you were to go with this Premier League club to America, what would have been your role?
Yeah, so I would have been in charge of the development for an under 18s girls side, and looking after them for a short. It only would have been for a few months, so I would have been out there for the similar time as to what I was with before, so about 4 months throughout the pre-season, which potentially would have affected what I was doing at Solihull Moors. So I had to weigh that options up as well in terms of if I went away, how much of an impact that was going to have on my current situation. Looking after the development of under 18 side. So I would have been working with this club to embed their Premier League club values and install them into their American philosophy sort of thing, and would go around and would go and support the development of a lot of American football clubs, linking in with this Premier League club that I was going out there with.
So in November of 2024, Solihull Moors, you did go ahead and become their manager in November. So the season would have been away by then, right?
Sorry, say again.
So the season would have started by the time that you joined Solihull Moors, right?
Yeah.
And what was the situation when you joined? Where were they in the table? And I presume when the previous one got sacked.
Yes, well, the previous management actually left with a lot of the players, and the club and team went through an incredibly difficult time. Where, and I'll be open and say that the women's team said that they were the least supported women's team within the entire of the UK, which is quite a statement. It got a lot of coverage from the Sun, the press, and there's quite a lot of main media channels reporting on it. BBC did one as well, and obviously I was out of work at this point, doing teaching, and obviously previously left Burton Albion in the summer, went in. I think we had 12 players. A lot of those players were under 18s players that had been promoted to the first team immediately because a lot of the previous players had left. Really difficult time. However, I went in with the aim of trying to change the perception and actually the reality a little bit as well, which I felt as though me and my assistant did at the previous club at Burton Albion, and going back to that professional environment. So it was really important for us to try and do that at Solihull. I think we have done that. Hopefully, I don't feel as though I've achieved success, if you like, just yet, but we felt as though we've really changed the environment and the professionalism, and people look at hopefully us a little bit differently now and actually see that we've got professional principles, values, and we're a team that ultimately are competing and wanting to win. So yeah, managing that situation early on was hard. We got maybe a bit unlucky because we felt as though we got all the easy teams, if you like, or the easier teams in the first in the league. And then towards the end, as we was bringing in players, we felt as though we were playing some of the tougher teams in the league. So, but yeah, it was a difficult season.
And then this season, you will be playing Burton. So how does that feel for you?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to going back. To be fair, there's a lot of very good people that I had the pleasure of, being around for quite some time. I've lost touch with a few of them. It'll be interesting because I think a lot of what they've done, they've stayed very similar to when I left. I don't know how many changes they've made really. I suppose we'll leave for the talking on the game day to do the talk, and we'll see what happens, I suppose.
And you could go on an FA Cup run this year. You're still in the preliminary rounds.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a tongue twister. In the second round of that, what are you looking forward to in the Cup? How far do you think you can go?
Yeah, again, in terms of success, our aim is to win a trophy this season. I'm not saying we're going to sit here and going to go to Wembley and win the FA Cup. Because,
would be nice though.
Yeah, it certainly would. If we can, get to maybe a Tottenham Solihull Moors final, that would be nice. But yeah, so we've got the League Cup, we've got the County Cup, we've got the League, and we've got the FA Cup, and it's really important for us to try and change the perception even further. And we really believe that, fingers crossed, if we get a half decent draw in the Cup, that we back ourselves actually to even beat teams in the league above us, which is maybe quite a statement. We feel as though we've got enough quality to do that and maybe create a bit of an upset, which is exciting. So if the draw is kind to us, or at least gives us a fairly not too hard draw, then we feel as though we could get through the first few rounds and bring a bit of money back into the club as well, which always helps.
Are you going to be going to the draw? Is it one of those in-person ones?
No, it's online. I think it just gets put out on Twitter, to be fair. So not as fancy as the men's FA Cup. Not in the earlier rounds anyway as well. But yeah, we'll see. We're hoping for a few easy draws to begin with, to be honest, because we want to try and give maybe a few players who are on the fringes of the team some more minutes and an opportunity to get more game time. We've got players who have been with us and just joined sort of towards the end of pre-season, so we want to give those minutes. They're really good players, but maybe just need an extra few minutes in the tank to really push for a starting place in the league.
Could you talk to us then about the divisions that you're currently in? Because for some people, it can get a bit confusing. So could you start us off with the Women's Super League, Women's Super League 2, and then go down from there?
Yeah, so we've got different regions. So we've got Women's Super League, Super League 2. So Super League 2 are the likes of Newcastle are in there, and they're looking to, I think, to get promoted into the WSL. Now in Tier 3, so in the Tier 3 Midlands teams, you've got teams such as Nottingham Forest, Wolves, Derby County. You've also got teams in there such as Sporting Chelsa. I think Halifax potentially in there as well. So in the women's game, it's not always typically the biggest club aren't towards the top, and Sporting Chelsa to play in Tier 3 is a bit of a statement as well because they're not the biggest team in the world. Tier 4 we have Notts County. Trying to think of what other maybe recognised teams are in that Tier 4 leagues as well in the Midlands one. So Lincoln, Notts County, Boldmere, Loughborough Lightning, who are Loughborough's team. They won the league last season, are there in Tier 4. Then we sit in Tier 5. So it's quite a way down the pyramid, but ultimately, if we win promotion into the National League, then it's only 2-3 steps from being really professional, being a professional team. So things can change really quickly in the women's game. Sometimes you have teams that end up winning promotion after promotion and then dropping quite a few divisions down. And then never really doing much for a few years. I feel as though Solihull Moors have maybe been a team that have been on the up for quite some time, and just before we came in, there was on maybe a sort of a spiral downwards, and we're now looking to get them to where they were previously.
And obviously, with these fixtures going on, I found it quite similar to Gibraltar, if I remember rightly, where quite often you're finding yourself with a lot of free time and quite a few weeks free. Is that correct?
Yeah, 100%. It's in the National League's pretty good, but it's like towards the end of the season, you've got quite a lot of midweek games. So balancing that with players' availability as well, and don't forget a lot of players still work. And again, with me with teaching, sometimes it's you finish teaching, you have to run straight off to the stadium or scoot over. We played Worcester in a really important game towards the end of last season, and it was under the lights. They play at a stadium called the Six-Way Stadium, which is a phenomenal stadium. It's a rugby pitch, yeah, we went to win. We drew 0-0, which was a shame, but we gave it a good go. But yeah, it's sometimes difficult to try and get the players as well in the right mentality, because some people are stuck in traffic. Worcester's probably about an hour and 45 minutes, just over maybe 2 hours away from my house. So quite a long time. So having to finish work quickly, nip back to my house, then go straight there, it can be challenging sometimes. But it's non-league. That's typically non-league in the men's game, and at this level in the women's game. So you have to do what you need to do.
And Joe, the last thing from me would be about coaching badges. What are you doing? What are you working towards? And where do you want to end up?
Yeah, hoping to do my UEFA A license next season. So I'm currently a UEFA B holder, but really pushing hopefully to get onto my A license through working with the men's side at Solihull Moors and also the women's team here, which is hopefully put me in a good place where I can actually get onto the course. It's sometimes difficult. For example, with the A licenses, you have to actually apply to get onto the course. You can't just pay the money, which is I think it's £4,000 this season, potentially more to get onto it. So you have to apply. You have to be working at ultimately an elite level to try and get onto the course. And then that's one step before the pro license, which is the top license. And I suppose going back onto the sort of UEFA B, the content that you learn on that is largely focused around training and developing individual player technique and tactics. So you look at the primary player. So typically what you do in a session, certainly maybe youth level, under 18s, I can imagine this is what happens at a lot of maybe Premier League clubs, is that when typically you're coaching a style of play, you focus on primary player and a secondary player within one training session. So you might actually just do a training session around one or two players. I think it depends on what perspective you're looking at it from a coaching angle, because sometimes for me that's maybe not relevant, because when you've got to try and keep 20 players occupied and engaged within the session, sometimes that's quite difficult. And then that leads on to then looking at different units. So for example, if you're looking at pressing, you'll likely start at pressing, looking at the front number 9 striker, then the number 7 and the 11, and then stripping it back all the way to maybe one session you've got linking around the back 4 and ultimately how they press within that.
So I actually lied there. That's not my last question, because you just built onto 2 more points that we got to talk about. So firstly, let's carry on about the coaching badges. So you mentioned that you have to apply to be on UEFA A, and everything below, so UEFA B, UEFA C, and then the FA levels, you can just do them, right? You can just pay the money and do them.
UEFA B, you have to apply. I think it's a little bit easier now. I remember there was a few grassroots coaches on my UEFA B, so it's aimed at coaches working the 11v11 game that has aspirations to work as a paid job, as a career within the game. So ultimately, having UEFA B enables you to have a full-time position, really. But with an A, it probably really puts you in a good place if you have the A license to get those full-time roles. So yeah, UEFA B license, if I remember, I think it's about £1,500. I think it cost me about £1,000, but I think it's gone up for this season. But yeah, you level 1 and you level 2. I think it's called something slightly different now, Introduction to Football Coaching, I think your first one. And then UEFA C for the UEFA level 2, if you like. I believe that you can just apply for those. You can get on them and then you do it. And then the level 1 is online as well. So very straightforward to do them online. It's quite interesting because a lot of coaches aren't happy that it's moved online, because they say that it takes away like the actual real learning. But I was speaking to somebody from the FA, and actually one of the main reasons as to why they've done that is because the actual statistics of uptake from I think it's BAME and female coaches, it's something like 73. It's a random figure. That's not factual. That's just me just saying it. But 73% of more females are likely to apply for the introduction online coaching course rather than the in-face one. So I think their trade-off, and that's not me saying I agree or disagree, but the trade-off from that is that, you know, so many more females are applying to get onto their introduction to online one, which ultimately is massively positive, isn't it? So yeah, there's maybe a little bit of a debate going on around that, which maybe not a lot of people know, to be fair. But yeah, I thought it was maybe an interesting point to share.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I always think that these badges are very, very good for the price for the starters. I think it's decently priced. Secondly, you have to sort of get it to coach. But the last thing is the networking that it is involved. It's like you don't walk out and all of a sudden you've got a UEFA B, a UEFA A license, and you can just walk into a job. You have to network, and that is easier said than done.
Yeah, you know, there's plenty of people on there which we've needed a third coach this season at Solihull Moors, and to be honest, we're actively still looking. But to be able for me to tap into a couple of coaches that are on my course to see if they'd like potentially to come in or not, I've got a great relationship with a lot of them, to be fair, and I still speak to them. There's one guy on my course which worked at Wolves Women. So from there, we've sort of, I managed to go down and shadow Wolves Women for a few sessions, which was I was really appreciative of it, first of all. But, you know, I never would have got that, you know, through my UEFA B license. And I suppose the biggest point as well is that, you know, I'm very lucky enough to shadow Matt Taylor, the men's first team coach at Solihull Moors, who's been at Shrewsbury, Tottenham under-18s, Terry O'Connor. Terry O'Connor is the assistant coach, who's worked with Mick McCarthy at Wolves, managed in the Premier League. And to go from being on the courses to being around them is obviously, for me, is two worlds apart, because a lot of what the FA try and deliver is very good, but maybe is focused around certain aspects, and what they're delivering is also very different, because, you know, it's two completely different environments. So for me to see the two, and for me to then have to combine the two and build my sort of coaching model and game model and philosophy off that, hopefully it's put me in a really good place.
I spoke to a manager not long ago who was saying that he prefers to be a coach rather than the manager, because he can have that like human connection almost with the players, whereas the manager has to be a bit more serious. And I suppose you're the serious one, right? Do you like to be the serious one, or do you want to keep that relationship?
Yeah, I think you know what, one of my other aims is that I'm still young, so I'm only still 25, and people gave me advice early on to not go into management, and funnily enough, my aim early on in my career was to be a foundation phase lead within an academy. So I don't know, I could be working for Tottenham's head of foundation, looking after their under 12 players and to develop those sort of technical aspects. Whereas the more sort of that went on, you know, the more I love the leadership side from maybe a more adult perspective, and getting the best out of adults and young people. Because I feel as though, yeah, maybe, I don't know, I've got a back my set of skills which will allow me to do that. One of the things that I would like to do is I'd like to be an assistant coach, and purely focused on that development aspect of coaching. Sometimes with the management side, again, like I've said, I've sometimes got wrapped up with on the pitch stuff. And again, there is a lot of pressure there. In some ways, I quite like it, and a lot of that pressure comes from me and myself. But sometimes it's, so for example, on a match day, it's I try and, for example, Ange Postecoglou stands there for 90 minutes. It's very different to Conte, who very passionate on the sideline, and just by observing Ange and trying to implement a couple of things from that elite level, I've learned loads where, you know, I can't make the right decisions if I'm emotional. I can't be emotional. I've really got to be maybe that sort of laid back aspect, and make decisions with that less emotion, if you like, because that leads to better decision making, I feel. So yeah, maybe going down the assistant manager's route allows me to not have as much pressure on myself, and focused on that individual development aspect more, where I can watch a game on a Sunday next to the manager, and I'm purely focused on the tactical and player development decisions, rather than thinking about managing what substitutes I'm putting on, because if I don't want to, I'm afraid of upsetting a certain player for one reason, or if that makes sense.
No, it does. And the reason why I was forgetting is because I'm so keen to know about the relationship between the men's and the women's team, because we've been seeing quite recently, I think quite badly actually, that a lot of companies who own the football clubs have been selling off their women's teams to generate funds for PSR, which is not actually good enough, I don't think. So for Solihull Moors, what's it been like to work alongside the men's team? And you mentioned about pumped up footballs. Is there do you share the equipment, share the facilities?
Yeah, we share. So we actually play our games. It's a place called Studley Sports Centre. It's the men's training ground, and it's a good training ground for Solihull Moors, considering in the National League it's probably, I don't know. Burton Albion they trained at St George's Park. Obviously, very lucky and fortunate enough to be there. However, I actually think Solihull's is better, even though that it's not as high tech and as fancy, because Solihull Moors own it and it's their own training ground, their own facility. They can do what they like, if I'm honest. The pitches are amazing as well, and they've got everything that they need. And it's, I suppose, aspects of it is still quite old school in terms of like ice baths. They've just got, a bin turned upside down, bit of ice cold water in there and some ice cubes, but that's all you need, and it's got quite a good feel to it. So yeah, the relationship between me and the football club, I think you have to have it if you want a successful football club as a whole. You have to have a relationship where the men's team speak to the women's team, and not just that. Where I was speaking to. I always try and speak to the junior coaches, for example, with the men's and girls teams, just so they feel a part of the club. And I certainly feel very much a part of Solihull Moors because the manager allows me to sit upstairs in his office with him. Even been up there with the sporting director, and that they're talking about potentially signings and who's injured, and you've got to be careful because that information sort of can't get out. But I feel very fortunate to be around that environment of elite managers, going back to Matt Taylor, who was Tottenham under-18s coach for 2-3 seasons, and who worked alongside Ryan Mason, who's now at West Brom. And I'm, standing there making notes and taking all of his sessions away with me, if you like, and how he operates. And I think himself, to be fair, is probably very unlucky to. It probably sounds quite bad, but he probably should be working at a high level. He's been very unfortunate, I think, with some of the roles that he's had with Shrewsbury Town, for example. So, I think he's an EFL coach. He's a high performing elite coach. So for me to be around that, it is massive, and I look to implement things that obviously he does into the women's things as well. It's probably one with coaching abroad, it's probably up there with something that I've enjoyed the most, being able to be around that environment.
Well, Joe, look, I appreciate you joining me today. I wish you all the best of luck with this season. It was so interesting to hear about America, Solihull Moors, so many other clubs as well, and it was just brilliant to have you on. So I really appreciate it.
No problem. I certainly learn a lot from reflecting as well on podcasts and things as well. So yeah, really enjoyed it. So thank you very much.